environment.
So we've been hearing from a lot of these major tech companies, a lot of software firms, and really the conversation has also been a focus on CapEx. As we think about AI and a lot of the transitions that are happening, of course, that requires a lot of money. How are you all thinking about spending right now? And what are you thinking in terms of AI developments at the company?
Yeah, AI, I think, is exciting for the industry, for Procore, for general software. For us, we are thinking about AI and agents and large language models, both from an external works itself into our product, as well as internally in the ways that it could optimize the way we work as a company here at Procore. We continue to make investments in AI. We have made investments historically in AI with some of our prior acquisitions well before the recent push and the recent news and push on from a broader standpoint. It's something that we are continuing to work into our product with things like Copilot, our agents in our Agent Studio. And then internally, we have been on a journey of operational excellence, of which AI is going to be a part of that as we continue to scale our business past where we are today at the $1 billion mark over next several $1 billion as we continue to grow. So critical to how we think about the way we operate internally, as well as critical to the value that we add in our product offerings to our customers.
Howard, you said earlier that your guidance is conservative going into the second quarter. I'm wondering how you're thinking about other spending, not just on AI, but also on, for example, hiring. What are your plans there, and then how far will you be also cautious there?
But what we've talked about is last year and going into the first half of this year, we made a commitment to go on a number of changes in our go-to-market organization to set ourselves up for much better engagement, much more intimacy with our customers. We're basically moving to a general manager model, adding more technical resources that allows us to do that. Most of that hiring was already completed at the back part of Q4 and in Q1. The reason that's important relative to this question is essentially most of our expense structure is going to be around people, and most of our hiring incrementally has already been done. And so our expense profile is going to be very consistent throughout each quarter of this year. And as we continue to grow revenue, that scale will then flow through to our profitability profile as we work throughout each quarter of this year. In terms of the commitments, those were the major commitments that we got done in the beginning. And as I think about commitments going forward, making sure that we are very careful about making commitments that are too long-term, leave ourselves flexibility depending on what happens in the demand environment. And that's the way that I'm thinking about how to invest in the business. The other thing that we're doing is we still have $200 million left in our for a stock buyback that we will continue to look for opportunities to deploy.
Howard, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time today. Howard Fu there, he's the Chief Financial Officer over at Procore. And our thanks, of course, to Nina Trentman as well from Bloomberg News. Check out her newsletter, CFO Briefing, Bloomberg CFO Briefing. This is Business Week Daily.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. Prosecutors and regulators are investigating a $32 million deal between CrowdStrike and Carasoft Technology to supply cybersecurity software to the Internal Revenue Service. Investigators with the Justice Department and the SEC want to know what senior company executives knew about that deal. CrowdStrike shares are 4.7% lower. Wall Street may be ending this week on a cautious note. The U.S. and China preparing to start those trade negotiations this weekend. Investors skeptical that these talks will result in a comprehensive agreement. They are instead preparing for a period of volatility and uncertainty. And the markets sense that. We check them for you all day long here at Bloomberg, but there's so little change. The S&P is down 1 point. Well, now, okay, 2 points. NASDAQ down 6 points, and the Dow is down 99 points. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.36%, the 2-year yield at 3.87%. Richmond Fed President Tom Barkin says it is not a given that companies will be able to raise their prices to offset the cost of tariffs. He warns consumers' tolerance after years of inflation is only so high. He says the economy is in a good place, and he warned that tariffs could put upward pressure on inflation. He spoke at the Loudon Chambers Policymaker Series. And Fed Governor Christopher Waller links Fed accountability to economic stability, saying that the stability improves when monetary policymakers are held accountable to voters and have job security. Waller's remarks follow criticism from President Trump aimed at Fed Chair Jay Powell and the central bank. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Matt Miller and Nora Melinda.
Amy Morris, thanks very much for that. We're going to get to pretty much my favorite topic.
Oh,
and
only.
Also, talk to one of my favorite people. There's a crew of reporters at Bloomberg that I love the most. You know, Keith Naughton, David Welch, Gabby Coppola, Albertina Torsoli, Craig Trudell, Chris Frauwald, like this whole autos crew that has been covering cars for so many years. And today we have an excellent story to use as an excuse to bring Gabby Coppola in. Stellantis may finally name a permanent chief executive officer. They fired Carlos Tavares in December. We're in May, and they still haven't got it.
It's been a minute.
Yeah, this is a company with like 8 brands. You know, they have Jeep, they have Chrysler, Dodge, Ram, Fiat, Alfa Romeo.
Keep going anymore?
I can continue, like Peugeot. It goes on, but they haven't had a real boss. I guess John Elkann is a very smart guy with a lot of experience. But anyway, Gabby Coppola joining us out of Detroit. Always great to talk to you, Gabby. What do we know? Do they finally have a new leader at Stellantis?
Hey, thanks for having me, Matt. I think they're getting close because, as you noted, they fired Tavares in early December, and they said they would choose a new CEO in the first half of 2025. And we're all looking at the clock saying, okay, wow, 5 months have gone by. And, you know, it looks like the emerging, lead candidate is this man, Antonio Filosa, who is an Italian who spent a huge chunk of his career actually in South America and Brazil. He was a protege of the late Sergio Marchionne, who I'm sure you know, but he was kind of the turnaround whiz who saved Fiat and then saved Chrysler and, brought back Jeep and Ram and Dodge and made them really strong brands again here in the U.S. So back last fall, when Tavares was trying to shake things up to, react to some of the performance problems he was having, he brought Filosa up from Brazil to be the CEO of the Jeep brand. But it was only about a year and change before then they promoted him again and said, okay, he's going to be head, of the Americas. This guy is he's no longer the head of Jeep, but he's head of the Americas, and he's also head of quality. So they've been throwing a lot of stuff at him, I think, to try to test his mettle and see if he's really up for the job. The other part of this, I think, it's that, it is a really hard time to find someone to lead a car company. I mean, it's a tough time for the auto industry. I think it already was with just the challenges posed by electrification, autonomous vehicles, the rising China threat, all those things. But then, I got to say, Tavares did a lot of damage. He left a lot of damage in his wake. I mean, that's why he was pushed out kind of a year before his contract was supposed to end.
Right.
He cut too deeply.
They
And
made
it
a lot
really
of questionable
affected-
decisions. I'll tell you from a consumer's point
Yeah.
of view, like killing
Yeah.
the Challenger and Charger, I have no idea why they did that. They put out an electric version that looks pretty cool, but nobody who wants a muscle car wants an electric
And everyone
vehicle.
loved the Charger.
Yeah, I absolutely love my Challenger. But there are other candidates, right, Gabby? I mean, your reporting includes Jose Munoz absolutely crushing it at Hyundai, which has made huge strides into the U.S. market. Mike Manley, who I think ran Jeep as well in the past, and now is running Auto Nation, which is, Americans buy used cars now because no one can afford a new car. Who are the other people? Who are the other people that you think? Because Filosa isn't really a known quantity in the way that these other guys are.
That's true. I mean, he's never been CEO of a whole company before. Manley, not only did he run Jeep, but when Sergio, dramatically passed away in 2018, it was Manley who ran the company from 2018 until 2021. I mean, those are the ones that were for sure have confirmed. I think, they've been looking for 5 months. People thought maybe Elkann would come with sort of a left field type candidate, somebody from outside the auto industry, like he did with Ferrari, which his family also controls through the Agnelli kind of.
And he picked Benedetto
fund.
Vigna, who ran ST Microelectronics for Ferrari.
Right. Like not an obvious choice. So there's a lot of speculation around that, and I do want to stress that I don't think this is a sure thing. Like this, it's not decided yet. Things are still fluid. There could be some other candidate that Elkann is just keeping very close to the vest. But, as far as my reporting, we met with Albertina. Thank you for the shout out, Albertina, Daniele, Tommy Ebhart. I mean, what we're hearing is that Filosa is maybe the strongest candidate now. And, still, like I said, Tavares already created a lot of problems by cutting too deeply. There's some key holes in the lineup here in the U.S. They don't have a midsize SUV. They took out the Jeep Cherokee and did not replace it.
Gabby,
so that's part of why they've underperformed.
Gabby, so speaking of underperformance, I mean, this stock has really taken a beating, especially as you look at it in comparison to some of its other peers. I'm seeing shares of Stellantis down about 44% so far this year, and we're just in May. Is there any merit at all to maybe them looking outside the shop, getting an external person to come into management? Has there been any talk about that?
Yeah, oh no, absolutely. I mean, I think that was definitely on the table. The problem is, or the challenge is, who wants to take this job right now? Because the auto industry, just from a long-term perspective, is very challenging. It's getting more and more expensive to make cars. You got to invest in electrification. You got the rule. Look at what's happening in the U.S. with the rollback of fuel economy rules. I mean, all these companies. I mean, Stellantis under Tavares was oriented to go electric, and now you have Trump saying, okay, forget that. So it's like people are having to scramble their plans. The other thing to think about that makes this job very challenging, I think, is Stellantis is so different from Ford and GM. Who's the boss? The boss is in Detroit. The CEO is in Detroit. Ford, Bill Ford is in Detroit. Stellantis is really the auto industries of 3 different countries. It's America, it's France, and it's Italy. And all 3 of those countries want to protect their own manufacturing jobs. And in France, the state of France actually owns a stake in Stellantis. So you've got French people on the board, you've got Italians on the board. You don't have that many. I'd say Americans are the minority on the board, but there's obviously a lot of political pressure coming from President Trump here in the U.S. who wants to see more manufacturing here. I mean, you've seen the past, month has been just relentless, new tariff policies every week trying to encourage manufacturing. And Elkann already, right out the gate in January, as soon as Tavares was out, he went to go visit Trump, and right before the inauguration, and came with a big gift, which was he said, okay, that plant that Tavares said he was going to close in Illinois, I'm going to reopen it. So it's like he's got to make all these promises to all these politicians, all these countries saying, yes, we're going to invest, but they need to get the sales and profits back. They need to get the company in better shape in order to be able to keep all those promises. And I think it's going to be really hard in this current environment for whoever takes the job.
It's a tough time after some of the decisions they've made. And, last year, this time last year, they were crushing it. The stock had tripled in 5 years, and they've just come tumbling down. Gabby, great to have you. And thanks for mentioning Tommy Apart. He would be, I think, a good candidate, actually, to run the combined company. Matt Miller here with Nora Melinda. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
Not much going on in the market today here, Matt.
Yeah, I was just checking it out. We're still absolutely unchanged on the S&P for the day, but we're also unchanged for the week, and we're also unchanged since April 2nd. So
a whole lot of nothing, but a lot that happened in between.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we dropped after April 2nd,
I'm confused.
12% in 4 sessions, and we've made all of that back up. We're still down 3% for the year, but it doesn't feel that bad at 56.62 on the S&P 500. We're all looking forward to this meeting that Scott Bessent is going to. I guess he's not going to host it, right, in Geneva. That's neutral territory. So Bessent and Greer are going to go there and talk to their Chinese counterparts and hopefully come back with a deal.
Hopefully so. We have Emily, right?
Emily Griffeo?
Yeah, we have
want
to
do
hear
that
from
right
her.
now.
Let's
hang
hear
on
from
one
her.
second. I'm going to just do. I think there's some specific verbiage here. And yeah, here it is. Let's take a look at some of the stocks on the move today. Emily Griffeo joins us out of San Francisco. Emily, what do you got?
All right, well, there's not a lot of movement on the index level, but under the hood, there is a lot moving. Affirm Holdings is down 13%. They had earnings today. Remember, this is the buy now, pay later company. The earnings were actually pretty positive, but analysts had noted that the expectations were really high heading in and that the guidance might be conservative. So they now see their year forecast revenue $3.16 billion to $3.19 billion. That was actually higher than what they had seen previously, but we saw some movement here on the street. Mizuho cut their price target on the stock. Bank of America raised, and then the CEO told Bloomberg TV today that they're still seeing people spending. Consumers are spending. A mixed bag with these earnings, but when you look at the movement in the stock price today, it's very clear that it is moving lower, down again like 13% right now.
Well, talking of spending, I'm also thinking about the consumer, travel demand, all of that. You're also looking at Expedia. What's happening there?
That's right. So they're down 12%. It was the biggest intraday drop in a year. This is a very similar story with Expedia that we've seen with Airbnb, with bookings, with a lot of those travel-related companies this earnings season, that they're pulling back their guidance for what's going to come ahead given macro uncertainty. If you look at their actual results for Expedia, they cut their gross bookings growth forecast for 2025. So they now see gross bookings growth up 2% to 4%. They had previously seen up 4 to 6%. The revenue also missed, and JP Morgan said that their higher exposure to the U.S. is not ideal given the current backdrop. So higher versus some of those competitors, and then of course given that there's heightened macro uncertainty in the U.S., maybe versus some of those international markets.
Are you an Expedia user, or is there a specific age demographic that uses it?
I don't know what the specific age demographic is. I don't use it. I always think it's better to book the hotel directly through the hotel website.
Fair.
But I don't know. I'm personally not an Expedia user, but they clearly do have enough people that they are a publicly traded company with a stock price on the move.
It's funny. I'm 51 years old, right? My wife is 33. Mm-hmm. So I go straight to Expedia. And then she yells at me every time.
It's your demo. It's your demo.
It's because of my age, right? I think the old people use Expedia.
I don't want to call you out.
Young people say that's not the right way to do it.
I mean, I was going to say the people I was thinking of is, 50s, 60s. They love Expedia.
And the kids, what do you use? Like Kayak, Travel Worm?
Hopper even.
Hopper?
Yeah, I'd say so. Airbnb, all the others. You've also got eyes on Tesla. What's going on there?
Tesla is almost $1 trillion company again.
Yeah, it's up like 5% right now. It's leading the Mag 7 names. It's, outperforming the NASDAQ 100 on a day when, again, indexes are flat. I don't know if there's any fundamental news to this upward move today in Tesla. I did ask a couple traders. One person pointed out maybe there's some short covering going on here. Traders who were short the stock, preparing for potentially what could be good news between those U.S.-China trade talks this weekend. They don't want to be short Tesla going into that in case something good does happen that's pushing up the stock. And then there also could be some technical movement here. Tesla did breach above its 200-day moving average for the first time since March. So oftentimes traders see that as a positive technical signal and that the stock can continue to move higher after it breaches that upward level.
By the way, do the kids still want a Tesla? Emily, do you, do your classmates, do you want a Tesla?
Yeah, I mean, I do live in New York City, so people don't really think about buying cars, unfortunately.
Yeah, but you're from the burbs.
I
meant the people that you went to school with.
The cool people.
Do they want a Tesla now?
I would say that, by and large, there's been a reputational hit. Like, if you buy a Tesla, like, you're buying into that you're still an Elon Musk fan. So depending on your opinions on Musk. But I think that's what the street thinks, too, that, like, this stock is still very much tied to the whims of Elon Musk. But, I mean, every time I take a Tesla, when it's an Uber and it's a Tesla, I feel very fancy, I will say. Definitely feels like a luxury car.
It feels like
I feel like it's so Spartan and depressing, but anyway, the stock, as I said, almost $1 trillion. Right now, it's trading for $957 billion. You'd be hard-pressed to find another car company trading for that much. For more conversations like this, listen to our Stock Movers podcast. Subscribe for 5-minute episodes on the biggest winners and losers in the market.
CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by O'Reilly Auto Parts.
I'm Christopher Cruz. It happened last week and again today. Air traffic controllers directing flights into and out of Newark Liberty Airport lost radar for a terrifying 90 seconds early this morning. Reporter Brad Gibson says it's caused cascading delays.
Standing in front of the departure boards here at Newark International, it reads like a continuous list of delays and cancellations. More of those than actual flights on time. Late aircraft to Boston with 2 flights now scheduled 3 hours late. Crew connection problems on a flight to Raleigh-Durham that's now 2 hours late. And as for canceled flights, I'm now counting at least 30.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt today.
This outage at Newark Airport speaks to why the Secretary of Transportation yesterday made a massive announcement in investing in our aviation safety.
CBS's Nicole Scango says the day after the acting FEMA director was fired, his replacement is already making waves.
During his first all-hands meeting with agency personnel, the acting FEMA administrator, David Richardson, issued a striking warning telling employees, quote, "Don't get in my way," according to a recording of the speech obtained by CBS News of the former U.S. Marine Corps ground combat officer.
The new pope is already making his mark on the Catholic Church.
During his first Mass, Pope Leo XIV cautioned the assembled cardinals there are many settings in which Jesus, although appreciated as a man, is reduced to a kind of charismatic leader or Superman. He said this was true even among some baptized Christians and warned they thus end up living in a state of practical atheism. Elaine Cobb, CBS News.
A federal judge has ordered Tufts University doctoral student Romesa Osterk to be released on bail immediately as she challenges her detention. Here's CBS's Lilia Luciano.
Osterk's attorneys have submitted testimony from experts who say they had never seen a student detained as the result of a student visa revocation.
Retired Supreme Court Justice David Souter has died. CBS's Jan Crawford says Souter was nominated by a Republican president but didn't turn out to be the conservative vote Republicans were banking on.
He became one of the most liberal justices, a predictable vote with the left on issues like abortion, religion, affirmative action, gay rights, on and on and on. Every issue that was important to conservatives, he sided with the liberals.
David Souter was 85 years old. The Pentagon has ordered the military to pull and review any books in their libraries that discuss anti-racism and gender issues. Less than an hour before the close of the trading week, the Dow is off fractionally. S&P 500 in the green, but just barely. This is CBS. Does Chicago native Pope Leo XIV root for the Cubs or the White Sox?
When Dalton, Illinois native Cardinal Robert Prevost was elected Pope yesterday, the Cubs posted on social media, "Hey Chicago, he's a Cubs fan." Wrong, says his older brother, John Prevost.
He's Sox.
John says they've always been Sox fans growing up in that Chicago suburb.
Because really from Dalton to Sox Park wasn't that big of a deal. And of course, we were both altar boys, so that was one of the rewards that we got, was to go to a Sox game.
In a statement, the White Sox said they're honored to have a Sox fan represented at the Vatican, and the Pope is always welcome at the ballpark. Michael Wallace, CBS News.
Tampa Bay Buccaneers defensive tackle Desmond Watson has already made NFL history, even though he's a rookie. The 6'6", 464-pounder from Florida is the heaviest player in league history. He signed with his hometown Bucs after going undrafted. He'll begin his NFL journey during Tampa Bay's rookie minicamp this weekend. Christopher Cruz, CBS News.
This is Bloomberg Business Week Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
Happy Friday. Welcome back to Bloomberg Business Week Radio. We are here. We have lots going on at the end of this week. We're going to be talking a little bit about what's going on in terms of some of the Hollywood stuff that's going on with the tariff plan. We're going to be obviously getting us a bit into the markets as we head into the closing bell.
The Hollywood stuff. I'm actually excited about that. So this is the tariffs on foreign films, or films filmed in foreign lands.
And so hopefully we'll get some clarity on that from Chris Palmieri later in the show. I'm Nora Melinda here with Matt Miller. We're filling in for Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek. You can choose what order you decide to see that in. But we are going to hear from Amy Morris with the Bloomberg Business Flash here for Bloomberg News.
All right, thank you, Nora. President Trump floating that 80% tariff on China ahead of this weekend's negotiations. The White House says he was just throwing it out there. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Trade Representative Jamieson Greer are set to start those talks with China in Switzerland this weekend. Joe Quinlan at Bank of America says the trade talks are in the driver's seat for investors.
The big event is this weekend in Switzerland. I mean, where we go from here, I think, is going to be dictated what between the United States and China. Can he at least, it's nice that they agreed to talk, but I think any kind of energy behind this rally is going to revolve around bilaterally those two countries.
Joe Quinlan at Bank of America. We've been watching the markets all day. We check them for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 now up 3.5 points. NASDAQ up 12. The Dow is down 60 points. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.37%. The 2-year yield at 3.88%. New York Fed President John Williams says keeping inflation expectations anchored near policymakers' target forms the bedrock of central banking.
Well, right now, there's a lot of uncertainty about what's happening with trade policy. Right now, the economy's in a really good place in the U.S. Unemployment's in 4.2%, inflation's 2.3%. The other indicators show we're still a pretty solid economy. So right now, we have time.
New York Fed President John Williams speaking with Bloomberg's Francine Lacroix at the Reykjavik Economic Conference. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Matt Miller and Nora Melinda.
Thanks, Amy, for that Bloomberg Business Flash. We've got lots to talk about. I'm looking at a market that's flat here, but I really do want to dig into what's going on at Citadel. We're going to be joined here by Anna Kaiser, and she's based in Miami. Hope the weather is great there. It's rainy here in New York City. But Citadel is pushing for a 4-year non-compete. In Florida, it's essentially a lobbying spree. 4 years sounds insane to me for a non-compete. I'm really interested to hear what the reception has been and what's really going on here, Anna.
Yeah, so as you said, this is a bill that is in the Florida legislature. It is still waiting to be signed by Governor Ron DeSantis. So that is still pending, but it would allow for non-competes and garden leaves in the state to last for up to 4 years, which is a really long time, as you say. You know, some of the lawyers and policymakers who I spoke to for the story just described this bill as like very employer friendly. It puts a lot of power with the employer when it comes to non-compete agreements.
I mean, when I think about people and whether or not they'd actually sign a non-compete, I mean, if Citadel is a big name, of course, but do we feel like they have the juice? Do they really have the reputation enough to really get people to be willing to sign this 4-year agreement?
Yeah, I mean, I should note it's up to 4 years, so I guess it's going to be up to them, you know, how long they want to stretch those. I mean, it would be pretty hard for me to imagine doing it. 4 years is a really long time to be out on the sidelines. You know, it could really damage your career. I think it's something that employees there would probably have to think about a lot. You know, in exchange, like you said, it's a big name. They, you know, obviously compensate very well.
They pay a ton.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, it's probably a pretty tough decision that some future employees might have to face.
Yeah, I mean, the devil's in the details, right? If they're paying me enough, and if the 4-year non-compete was gardening leave, on which I would continue to get paid a ton, I probably would want to sign that. But it's not always the case, right? That's what I thought when I initially read your story this morning, Anna. Like, oh, that would be great, you know, getting full pay for 4 years, hanging out in the Keys, knocking back margaritas all day. But the issue is you don't always get paid on those years that you have to sit out during a non-compete. And even if you do get paid, if it's gardening leave, so-called, you still often don't get your bonuses. And this is an industry in which
bonuses matter.
People make exactly the lion's share of their compensation is in bonuses.
Yeah, exactly. So it sounds like a dream, right? You just get to sit back and be on vacation, but as you say, salaries actually don't make up a huge portion of compensation for a lot of people who work at hedge funds. So, you know, that might help you keep the lights on when you go on a gardening leave, but it's probably going to be a pretty big hit to your income. So it's not quite as sweet of a deal as it appears to be.
So, Anna, the bill has passed the legislature, but it's still awaiting the governor's signature. What's the timeline here? Is it something near term that we could get an answer on this?
Yeah, it's still not on the governor's desk officially. You know, the legislative session ended last week. There are, you know, a flurry of bills to sign. This is one of dozens. So it's hard to say when he would actually sign it. But it would probably be in the coming weeks.
And I mean, Florida, as we think about, I'm always thinking about people that are making that migration over to Florida. Great weather. That's what I'm the most jealous of.
But so flat.
This is true.
And it's not like the greatest roads. For me...
It's a no from you?
Yeah, it's like flat, long, straight highways.
But the palm trees, right?
Yeah, palm trees are good. And like I said, you know, hammocks and mixed beverages. Right. I appreciate that kind of thing. But you've got to deal with Florida man as well. Anna, what is it like living in Florida? I mean, you're surrounded by people that make the news as a joke. You know, not Ken Griffin, but the rest of the people in Florida. How is it living there?
I mean, it's an amazing place to be a reporter because there is never a dull day. We are always covering all sorts of different things, different characters, different figures, policies, politics. You know, we've got Mar-a-Lago just up the road. It's sort of the center of the Republican Party in so many ways. You know, center of so many ideas that are coming out of the Republican Party. So I will say it's never a dull day.
So talk to me about why Florida specifically with this story, right? I mean, they obviously have a presence in other states as well. So
Citadel.
True. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah. Sorry.
The way that the bill is written, it says that these kinds of non-competes and garden leaves would be applicable for a company where their principal place of business is in Florida. So in theory, that is trying to say that these could extend outside of Florida. You know, also this is a very heavily Republican legislature. They do often pass things that are sort of friendly to the business community, I think much more so than in New York. So it's just it's a friendlier environment for something like this to pass.
Well, and Ken Griffin, right? I mean, you mentioned Mar-a-Lago's up the road, and I'm sure that when the president is in the state, he commands the obedience of most people there. But when he's not, Ken Griffin is kind of like the de facto leader, right, of Wall Street South. And he's given so much money, I would imagine, to Republican candidates down there in the state, as well as the governor, Ron DeSantis, that they tend to do what he wants them to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's only lived here for 3 years, but he holds an incredible amount of power and influence, and he's very involved in sort of all levels of government. He, you know, donates and supports local candidates and local races here in Miami, you know, state candidates, and is just very involved in politics. He, you know, donates to all of the big charities and philanthropies. So he has a really big presence here in just 3 years. So I think it's pretty impressive. You know, you see his name on buildings all over Miami and even in Palm Beach too, where he also owns property. So he has a very big presence for a really short amount of time, in my opinion.
And of course, this is a really big bill. What are you hearing from sources about the odds of it passing?
You know, Governor DeSantis usually will pass something that is, you know, business friendly. It didn't have a ton of pushback in the legislature. The bill sponsors really argued that this is very important for Florida's business community, that this is going to attract businesses that have very high paying jobs because they're businesses that are dealing with, you know, high level trade secrets. So they sort of argued that this is actually really important for the business ecosystem in Florida. So in that sense, I think there's, you know, a good chance that the governor would sign it, but he declined to comment for the story. So, you know, we'll just have to see.
All right, Anna, thanks so much. Anna Kaiser, they're reporting to us live from Miami. She's in Miami, right?
She is in Miami.
She's in Miami, where, you know, Ken Griffin and Citadel definitely rule the financial sector there, Wall Street South, as we refer to it. I know so many people, Nora, who have left New York, you know, my age people.
Okay, your demo, let's be
For
specific.
Florida, my demo, right? Everybody at the club has decamped to Florida because they have no income tax.
Right.
Number one. Yeah, people my age are getting closer and closer to retirement. Number two, and
you said it, not me.
And you know, these Wall Street people tend to be more conservative, more right-leaning Republican supporters of the president. So they want to be closer and closer to the power center.
Closer to the hub there. I mean, I think that it's a really interesting, especially given the story that Anna was telling us about what that means for competitors. Do they have to do certain things to sweeten the deal when we're thinking about those in the finance space? And what really gets them going?
I'd say also the SALT cap must have pushed a lot of people out, because it used to be that you were allowed to deduct all of your state and local taxes. It was like that for 104 years since income tax started, because Americans are traditionally against the idea of double taxation. However, in 2017, with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, President Trump and the Republicans stuck us with a cap of 10% on state and local taxes, so that living in New York, York, living in New Jersey, living in Connecticut, living in California, these donor states to the federal government became a lot more expensive. So people then moved to the wagon rider states like Florida instead of the wagon pullers like New York.
Okay, there we go.
That's Virginia. You're from Virginia.
I am from Virginia. I mean, I think I won't compare it to Florida, but I would say it has a bit of a similar feel. It's at least the rural part of Virginia that I was in. So,
all right, I got to check it out.
Not New York.
I'm actually thinking about going down to Fredericksburg tonight.
Oh, wow. Very ambitious.
I found and purchased a used Harley-Davidson motorcycle, and I want to pick it up before my wife gets back from a business trip.
Love the spontaneity.
Otherwise, I'll be in trouble. S&P 500 right now, little changed on the day, on the week, and since Liberation Day. This is Bloomberg Business Week Daily.
3:21 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. We check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 now up 2 points. Nasdaq Nasdaq is up 10. See, here's what's going on. Pretty much everything is flat. A little bit in the green, a little bit in the red throughout the whole day. Most of the time, it's because stocks and bonds continue their fluctuation because the U.S. and China are going to be kickstarting their trade negotiations this weekend. So traders are just on hold. That's how Wall Street is going to be ending the week on a more cautious note. Air traffic controllers guiding planes in and out of Newark Liberty International Airport briefly lost communications and their radar displays early this morning. It's the second time this has happened in as many weeks. The FAA released a statement saying the breakdown originated at an FAA facility in Philadelphia. It happened close to 4 o'clock this morning, about 3:55. It lasted 90 seconds. Once again, your markets, the S&P 500 up 1 point, Nasdaq up 8 points, the Dow down 80 points, the 10-year Treasury yield 4.37%, the 2-year yield at 3.88%. And for on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Matt Miller and Nora Melinda.
Thank you very much, Amy Morris. Yeah, so as promised, well, first off, happy Friday.
Happy
Nora,
Friday.
It is very important to say that because it has been a long week.
It has.
And it's still great to be here, but we're going to, I think, all be happy when we can go home, you know, beer in the hand, feet in the sand, and just chill out.
We're bringing cheer.
For the weekend. Matt Miller here with Nora Melinda filling in for Carol and Tim, who probably both are sitting on a beach somewhere, just lounging. We want to talk a little bit about Hollywood because President Trump has promised to tax films made in foreign countries, and there's so many questions around this. How would it happen? And also, would it be helpful to Hollywood, where I think it's safe to say revenue from this business has been on the decline? Chris Palmieri joins us out of the Los Angeles Bureau, where he is Bloomberg News entertainment reporter extraordinaire, to give us his take. And Andrew Silverman is here with us in New York City at 7:31. Lex, he's a Bloomberg intelligence government analyst. He's a tax guy, a tax lawyer here in the studio to talk about this. Let's kick it off with you, though, Chris. And I want to ask if people in Hollywood, if people in Los Angeles, traditionally not Donald Trump's demographic or in favor probably of all of these tariffs, were like, this one is good. This one makes sense. This one helps me in my own pocketbook.
Kind of. So this all began with Trump's ambassador to Hollywood, one of them, John Voight, meeting last weekend with Trump in Mar-a-Lago. They came up with a proposal, his group, of really based on tax incentives. These are the tax credits that studios get for making movies in various states and countries. And there was a small component of that was about tariffs. The president grabbed the tariff concept and then put that out on social media. I think the studios would love to see more of a tax incentive thing than a tariff related thing, because the tariff would impact their ability to still operate overseas and would cost them money.
All right, so they'd rather see, I guess, subsidies than tariffs or tax incentives, as you say. It's interesting. I don't understand really exactly how this would work. And Andrew Silverman, maybe you have given it a little bit of thought from your vantage point, because there are a lot of films that are, there's scenes done in Eastern Europe or scenes filmed in China, for example, because of what a big market it's been. And then they still make the film, edit it, color it, put it together in Hollywood. How does this work in a tariff situation?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there are a lot of things that we don't know about this tariff. We don't know if it only applies to U.S. film studios making movies outside the United States. We don't know if it applies to foreign film studios making movies out of the United States. We don't know if foreign film companies coming into the U.S. making movies here would have the tariff applied to them. But the tariff is really interesting. It's actually quite like a tax. Well, I'm a tax lawyer, so to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Yeah. Exactly right. But it's a lot like either an excise tax or or a border adjustment tax, right? With regard to an excise tax in this case would be sort of a sin tax, right? A tax on alcohol, a tax on cigarettes. It's a federal sales tax. So in that sense, this is quite like that. It's trying to get American studios, American film studios, and American theater goers to not see movies made outside the United States, to change their behavior. And a border adjustment tax is a tax that only applies to imports, not to exports. Same situation here, right? If you're bringing movies, presumably, if you're bringing movie making into the United States, tariff doesn't apply. If you're exporting your movie making outside the United States, tariff applies.
And it seems as though there's been some positive reception, at least from Hollywood, what I'm hearing anecdotally about this, the idea of bringing more dollars and more things being made here in the U.S. as it pertains to films. But I mean, of course, to your earlier point, Matt.
I've heard people in L.A. as well that said they're pretty happy about this.
Right. So, Chris, what are you hearing?
Well, I think you have to differentiate. There are people that want the sort of carrot portion of this whole package, the tax incentives, as opposed to the stick portion, which is getting hit with a tariff. If you maybe own studio space and are in the business of actually making movies, if you're an actor or screenwriter and you just want to see, more work brought back to the U.S., then maybe you could make an argument for this whole movement. But I wouldn't say there's a broad embrace of the idea of tariffs. In fact, a couple of days after this first came out, you saw California Governor Gavin Newsom suggest sort of his own plan, which was $7.5 billion of federal tax credits, which was actually more in line with what the John Voight Group was proposing. Tax incentives, federal tax credits to make movies in the U.S.
Well, I mean, Chris, as a follow-up to that, so I cover real estate stocks, and one of the stocks that I cover is Hudson Pacific Properties, and they are actually an owner of a lot of these Hollywood studios, and Wedbush analysts are actually saying that tariffs, this whole situation, could potentially be a possible positive for the company. When we think about these Hollywood studios, could it be a perk at all for them in terms of bringing in more dollars to them specifically at all?
The tariff portion, it's a little tricky for the studios. They're going overseas because it's cheaper for them to do so, okay? So if they're forced by tariffs to come back here, it's not necessarily a win for them. It's a win for U.S. jobs, which is definitely something President Trump wants to do. And so you could see why some workers would be happy about that. Calculating a tariff on a foreign film, I mean, depends on how you define it. I mean, basically, all the Star Wars films were shot in the UK or Tunisia. They were all foreign films. And it's a very complicated process. The Voight Group did suggest some way of doing so, only putting a tariff on the parts that are shot overseas, and then really only slapping the tariff on in the case of what they called a bad actor who could have made the movie domestically but deliberately went overseas. It's a complicated thing.
I mean, I know people in LA as well who have space that studios rent, who have warehouses, and they have made for years revenue on companies shooting movies in their places, and they have less revenue now because studios are going overseas more. Also, I will note Australia's U.S. envoy said this is a tax on Bluey, which is a fantastic product, completely filmed overseas or colored overseas. And Andrew, I wonder about the legality of all of these taxes. And I guess it's a much bigger question, right? IEEPA, which is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, has been challenged in the past. President Trump tried to use it to expel TikTok in his first term, and then a couple of courts told him no can do. Now he's a huge fan of TikTok, of course, that Chinese social media site used to spy on us. What do you think about challenges to his tariff powers? Will they be successful in the courts, any of them? Is Congress ever going to take this power back from the executive?
So let me just start out by saying I'm also a huge fan of Bluey.
Yeah, it's great.
I have to see this.
It's a great product. Absolutely love it.
I must be late.
So the reason that President Trump referenced national security when he was talking about this tariff on foreign-produced films was because that's a key aspect of IEEPA, right? If it's related to national security, then the president can do it. And Congress has given that power away, even though it's in the Constitution. Congress said, look, if it's national security, It's the president's business to do what he wants to do. And it has been challenged in the past. But normally the president wins those lawsuits because courts don't question national security.
And Hollywood films are a matter of national security, right? Isn't that what we all think? Isn't
Obviously.
that the case?
Of course.
Yeah. Chris, I mean, the president has said that. Chris, I just want to ask for a second because I can't let any mention of John Voight go without bringing up his Chrysler LeBaron that George Costanza bought. Does everyone know the reference that I'm making, or does nobody watch Seinfeld?
I think you're alone, unfortunately.
Am I alone there? Chris Palmieri, did you not see that episode?
There's so many great John Voight moments. I don't know where to start, but look, President Trump appointed him, Mel Gibson, Sylvester Stallone as his ambassadors. I got to give Voight credit. He's the only guy who actually came up with some plan, and he's getting everybody talking about it in Hollywood, and maybe even we'll get something accomplished. So
it's a great episode.
For the Midnight
and
Cowboy.
He leaves his pencil in the glove box, and then George has John Voight's pencil. And anyway, I wonder if you think he also screened Alcatraz with the president while he was at Mar-a-Lago, because together with the film tariffs came the idea to reopen that prison off the coast of San Francisco. And what's the reaction been like on the West Coast to that little piece of information?
Similarly, shock and awe. You may have seen the reports that that was closed 50 years ago because it cost 3 times more than any other federal prison to operate. So I can't tell you if they screened it. I know they all watched the Kentucky Derby together, and I'm almost positive that Trump did not bet on journalism. But
and Chris, I know Hollywood has really been through a lot, especially as we reflect on the fires. What's it like? I mean, of course, you live there personally. What's it like, and what's the recovery been like for the industry more broadly?
Well, you have to understand what's going on here, you have to step back a few years. We had this era where people were calling peak TV, and there were 600 scripted TV programs were being made because everybody wanted to create the next Netflix. And it didn't matter how much you were spending, you were trying to get as many subscribers. That started to change around 2022. The strikes happened, and then the studio said they were already cutting back, and then they said, we can get back, we'll buy with a lot less. And at the same time, streamers were trying to reach a global audience. So we're now watching TV shows that were made in South Korea or France or Israel. And so this is what happened. We reported last year, production in the U.S. between 2021 and 2024 declined about 29%. So there's a number of factors: the cost cutting, the globalization of the entertainment industry, and the tax credits that you can get by making a film in the UK or Australia or whatever. A lot of things converging.
All right, Chris, great to have you on the program. Thanks for joining us. Chris Palmieri, there out of our Los Angeles bureau. He covers Hollywood for us and entertainment. Andrew Silverman here from Bloomberg Intelligence, our resident tax lawyer, talking about a business that represents about $500 billion, about 3.2% of all U.S. goods and services. This is Business Week Daily. I'm Matt Miller with Nora Melinda. Happy Friday.
It's 3:40 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. We check markets for you all day long at Bloomberg, and stocks are, well, I guess they're just flat. Let's get straightened out at the First Word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call with Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Amy. That's right. U.S. stocks are quiet head into the U.S.-China trade talks this weekend. Dow's currently down 105 points. S&Ps are a little changed, and NASDAQ is higher by 10. The U.S. 10-year yield is at 4.37%. Gold and oil are in the green. Oil is climbing, and Bitcoin, that's higher by 0.4%. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, leaders were energy and real estate. Healthcare was under pressure, and leaders to the upside in the Dow, Boeing and Chevron, while Merck fell 1.8% and led to the downside. After earnings, Microchip rose 12%, Akamai fell 10%, and in the energy space, the New York Times reported that the administration is weighing orders to speed up the construction of nuclear power plants. Wrapping things up, Tesla gained 5% today with the potential breakout above the 200-day moving average. Live from the First Breaking News Desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Amy?
All right, thank you, Bill. And this just crossing the Bloomberg terminal, a federal prosecutor says the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, has been arrested at an ICE detention center where he was protesting its opening. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. This is not a toy. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive. It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Friday. We're driving to the close. Not too long to go until we'll see where the numbers stand. But I'm Nora Melinda here with Matt Miller. I'm filling in for Carol Master. He's filling in for Tim Stinovic. We've got a lot going on as we head into the close. We're going to have a great conversation with Erin Gibbs. She's CIO at Gibbs Wealth Management. I mean, the market's really been doing a lot. It seems like we've had a lot of data to consume. Tariffs have been in the conversation. As we look at today, the market's a bit flat. But Erin, how have you really been thinking about this earnings season, and how are you situating yourself and your clients during this time period of uncertainty?
Right. So we're done with earnings season. We've got a couple big names to go, but we're 90% done for the S&P 500. And when we look at it for Q1 of 2025, the numbers look great, right? We came in essentially at about 13% profit growth, and the expectations were coming in were about 6.5. So double, right? That's a big beat. And so that's very positive. The unfortunate thing is, of course, the markets are always forward looking, and when we look at earnings estimates for the next 3 quarters, estimate growth has basically been cut in half if you average it out over the next 3 quarters. For example, Q2 was expected to be about 7%, and now we're expecting 3%. That's barely beating inflation, so not very positive. And you can see that Wall Street really has a negative stance. The hope naturally is that companies are going to beat like crazy and all these tariffs will be resolved and it won't be such a big hit on the economy. But certainly Wall Street consensus and a lot of economists and strategists have been coming up with very big negative revisions. And so I think in following in that mindset, I think we need to be prepared for the worst of really mediocre, slow growth, barely, eking past inflation. Just be prepared for that if these tariff wars escalate and don't get resolved over the next 2 quarters.
It doesn't seem likely that they will be resolved over the next 2 quarters. But
TBD.
I wonder how the market, specifically the S&P reacts to that in your view. At the end of last year, post-election, people were talking about, like you say, 15% earnings growth in 2025. And now the average estimate is for 8%. So also essentially cut in half. Does that mean that, optimistic estimates for 6,500, for 7,000, for more on the S&P get sliced down by 1,000? Are we looking at more like, is 6,000 a great year if we end there in 2025?
Yes. I mean, honestly, I think that's highly unlikely. That was also
where we used to think that the Fed would be cutting rates a couple times this year. That looks increasingly unlikely, though again, that can change on a dime, because a lot of that is also expecting that valuations could expand or at least stay at these elevated levels. But if we're still talking about a Federal Reserve that's unmoved and continuously seeing overnight rates of 4.5 and mortgage rates of 6, we shouldn't expect that valuations should remain elevated at 23 times forward earnings. They should be more like 20 or 18. And so the only way to, there's two parts obviously to valuations, your earnings and your price. So either the price goes down or your earnings go up. And right now the earnings are not looking like they're going to go up some more. So I think, again, this is a very volatile moment. My best advice for investors is to stick with your discipline, stick with your overall strategy. Trying to time these kinds of changes, these headlines, will just end up making your broker richer. It's really tough to try to trade on comments and social media tweets and so on. And so really look for stocks that can weather a storm. So if there is increased cost and they're eating 3 to 5% and taking down your top line, you've still got the cash flow to be able to pay for that and weather this temp storm. We're going to say that the tariffs will be resolved eventually. And companies that have not only good cash flows, but just good balance sheets. We don't want those weak companies. You don't want those torpedoes and this type of uncertainty.
Erin, speaking of sticking with discipline and strategy, there was something out in the Bloomberg terminal today saying that data shows that firms are receiving more requests for transactions, including hedges that sidestep the dollar. As we think about FX, what are you betting on at the current moment, or rather, what are you advising clients to do?
So I do expect a weakening dollar. I think that the damage, whether regardless of how the tariffs play out over the next couple months, the damage is done, and the damage to our treasuries could even be worse if foreign countries stop buying them. So I think again, this is going to impact very mega cap companies, where if the dollar weakens, okay, that makes their prices look more attractive, but it's certainly challenging for those that are buying more. That's also going to hit your cost if those foreign goods that you use to make those companies are even more expensive just from an exchange rate, even if not including the tariffs. And so I'm looking at companies that, again, have the cash flow balance sheet, but also I think if we could really get the Federal Reserve question off the table, maybe even just one cut, I think that would really help some of the smaller cap U.S. companies that are more insulated from exchange rate volatility, that are able to source or have services strictly within the U.S. and don't have international clients. But that's much later down on the year when a lot of this volatility is out of it. So for now, I'm not saying we're making any tweaks or we're doing any adjustments to any investments right now, but I think it's something that we should consider going forward and obviously keep an eye on, and there could be opportunities down the road.
Erin, just got about a minute left here. I want to get to your picks and ask about both Mag 7 companies, Amazon and Apple, in light of, the tariffs. I know that Tim Cook is very good at getting carve-outs from President Trump, and he's proved that, but still they make, at least 80% of what they sell here in China. And Amazon, I don't know if it's 80, but it's more than 70% of the stuff they sell comes from China. So why do you like these two?
So really, it's because we do all know those numbers, right? We all know that they have most of their inputs are coming from outside the U.S. and the stocks have really been beaten up. And so I just like them as the really good entry points here because they are still lower. Right now, Apple is trading at 22 times forward earnings. That's the average of the S&P 500. And we know their growth is going to be higher than the S&P, or certainly that's the expectation. So for that, it just looks like, well, I've got a higher growth and, and Tim Cook again, assuming that he does his magic. This is a good entry point. Similar type with Amazon. I think it's trading at 26 times forward earnings today. But just really hard. I love the fact that it has such high margin revenue sources. And so, just given the growth and given
Aaron,
the margins.
I got to cut you off there. Thanks so much for joining us, Aaron Gibbs.
This is Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Business Week Radio. Had to think
It's
about
Business Week
which
Daily now. I noticed they made
we're
that
constantly
change.
changing, but okay.
I think it's a recent change.
I'm flexible.
We're all about Week Daily here because David Weston's show on Friday nights,
Right.
Wall Street Week, and then when he does a segment during my program, which is called Open Interest every day from 9 a.m. to 11 on Bloomberg Television, they call it Wall Street Week Daily.
Okay, so we like the week and we like the daily.
And now this is Business Week Daily.
All right. Well, also, happy Friday, everyone. We are sitting here looking at a market that's pretty much flat, but you know what I've been looking at recently, Matt?
Flights.
I mean, I always love to book a flight. I love to travel.
But not from Newark.
Not from Newark at all. It says that Newark Airport was hit again by a 90-second outage earlier today.
It is insane. Air traffic controllers that are, moving tin, as John Cusack used to say, guiding planes in and out of Liberty International Airport, which is, by the way, it's so confusing to try and get there.
Tell me about it.
It's also confusing, apparently, to move the planes around in the air. They, again, lost communications and radar displays this morning at like 3:55 a.m. It's the second outage in as many weeks affecting the transportation hub, and I think a lot of people just don't want to fly there anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it said the air traffic controllers alerted a FedEx aircraft that their quote-unquote scopes just went black again.
Yeah, the controller said, if you care about this, contact your airline and try and get some pressure from them to fix this stuff.
This is so alarming.
The pilot from FedEx 1989 said, oh, sorry to hear about that. I mean, I would be sorry if I were the pilot, right?
Granted, I mean, of course, FedEx did not immediately respond for comment on this, but this is just insane, especially given all that we've been dealing with in terms of the news flow with everything that's going on with airlines. I mean, of course, we had all those Boeing mishaps that has really been weighing on the stock for quite some time, and they're really trying to recoup those losses.
Boeing having problems with the 737, which I have to say is one of my least favorite planes to fly on. I don't like the narrow bodies. I don't like the Airbus A320s either, but we're going to talk to George Ferguson a little bit later in the program. He's our senior aerospace and defense analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. He's going to talk to us about this, the fact that Newark International Airport is falling apart, and the fact that IAG, which owns British Airways, as well as I think Iberia, the Spanish national airline, IAG has put in its biggest order ever for Boeing planes. But I think they're ordering the good ones, the wide body planes.
Hopefully so. But I mean, in terms of this Newark stuff, the fact that this is the second time, the last one being on April 28th, it's really making it interesting for people who, I mean, all of us that are here at the Bloomberg office, people love to go to the Newark airport.
And I think it's, by the way, it's got to put a damper on air travel in general, right? Because as I said, I found an amazing Fat Bob Harley-Davidson motorcycle down in Fredericksburg. I'm going to go down there tonight and pick it up. And I thought initially about getting on a flight. I would fly out of the LaGuardia Marine Terminal. Okay. But then I thought, I don't want to crash and die. So I'm going to take the Acela.
You said safety first, you know?
Instead, right? I think I can take a train straight to Fredericksburg, right? Or at least I change in DC.
Gets you close enough.
And I go down there, and I'll get on the motorcycle, and I'll drive back. And I feel like riding a motorcycle back from Fredericksburg, Virginia in the middle of the night is going to be safer than flying out of Newark right now.
I mean, hey, if that's what works for you. I mean, I honestly have been looking at some of these Amtrak tickets too, and they're super expensive as well. So I'm wondering if it's people moving away from the airlines and maybe they're just trying to book trains right now.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to be, not only do you not want to fly out of Newark, you can't because they cancel more flights out of Newark today than they actually have flying in and out of the airport. So
what a time.
We'll talk to George Ferguson about that again later on in this program. And right now we're preparing for my absolute favorite segment on Bloomberg Television and Radio, the Close Simulcast with my man, Romaine Bostic, as well as Scarlett Fu and Alex Steele. Do you watch this or listen to this every day?
Of course. Yeah. This is going to be a good time.
It is must-see TV.
Yes.
Matt Miller here, in for Carol Masser, Nora Melinda in for Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Business Week Daily. This is Bloomberg.
The Closing Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic here with Alex Steele, taking you through that closing bell with the global simulcast. It starts right now. Scarlett Fu in the TV studio, as always. In the radio booth today, though, Carol Masser and Tim Stenovic on assignment. Matt Miller filling those shoes. I'm not sure if you're filling in Tim's shoes or Carol's shoes, but Nora Melinda will fill the shoes of the other as we welcome our audiences across all of our Bloomberg platforms. Matt, here on a day where we're seeing modest declines as we head towards the close.
Yeah, really very little change, right? The S&P down to 0.1%. And I was taking a look back to see how we've done this week. Also, very little change for the week. Very little change since April 2nd. We're basically unchanged at that 56.60 level since Liberation Day. Still off about 3% for the year, 1% since the election. But the S&P really hasn't done as much as maybe we would have expected it to after Donald Trump won the presidency back in November.
And if we're looking here on Friday, I mean, we're seeing energy is the best performing sector in the S&P 500 that we've been seeing, and real estate following right after.
You know what has moved a lot since April 2nd is the U.S. dollar. The Bloomberg Dollar Index down about 3.5%. So as much as we've seen the U.S. stock market, go down by a lot, make this sharp recovery and kind of just sit there at those levels, the U.S. dollar has been hit hard, and it'll be taking center stage this weekend as well.
Not to harp on it, but it's really hard for me to take any equity moves very seriously when there could be a lot of mechanical buying. I was mentioning earlier that Citi says if you have a swing under 2%, you have volatility-controlled funds have to buy equities.
Absolutely here, and you get the closing bells here in New York. An interesting day here, too. We talk about this idea of tight trading ranges. We talk about this idea of lower volume. You put that all together, and the net effect of it all is basically unchanged on the day. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, it takes a while for these numbers to settle, but it's down about 100 points, or about 0.3% here on the day. The S&P 500 lower by about 4 points, or less than 0.1% on the day. The NASDAQ Composite, we're just going to call that unchanged. Similar story for the NASDAQ 100, while the Russell 2000 giving up about 3.5 points on the day, or down about 0.2%.
Yeah, and we're looking at a drop of about 0.5% on the week, by the way, to 56.60 here on the S&P. The breadth is pretty unchanged as well. We have 239 stocks finishing up, 260 stocks finishing down, and then 4 unchanged, so more than 500 in the S&P 500.
All right, let's take a look at the sectors, and this is our IMAP. A pretty mixed day here. Energy was the best performers, gaining more than 1% as WTI climbs above $60 a barrel once again, hitting a high of 61. You also have gains in real estate investment trusts and consumer discretion, but these are fairly modest advances. On the flip side, healthcare and staples are among the decliners. These are your classically defensive sectors, down about 1.1% and 0.6%, respectively.
Just want a headline crossing the Bloomberg terminal right now for our viewers and listeners in the New York area. Newark Liberty Airport. This is in Newark, New Jersey, which has been facing a series of flight delays, largely because of staffing issues when it comes to air traffic controllers. We're now learning that the FAA here in the United States is weighing a broad pullback in the number of flights that can go into and out of Newark because of some of these radar issues. Remember, there were reports this morning of at least a 90-second radar outage that occurred at that airport. According to people familiar with the matter that our Bloomberg reporters have spoken to, U.S. aviation officials now plan to meet further on further flight cutbacks at Newark Liberty Airport, just across the river there in New Jersey.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, a couple gainers that I'm keeping an eye on here on this Friday. I'm looking at microchip technology. Now, this is a chip maker. It's about $29 billion market cap here. And it said that the period marks the bottom of a prolonged industry downward cycle. Now, we are hearing Bank of America, they upgraded the stock to neutral from underperform. As we're really looking through these earnings, it's really lifting shares of other peers like Texas Instruments, on semiconductor and analog devices. They all rose at the close. And we did have microchip technology up about 12%, 13% to end the day. But also looking at Lyft, I mean, when we think about its competitors, Uber didn't really live up to expectations as we saw those earnings and broke them down. But Lyft did. I mean, its earnings were resilient. The company has really been keeping a lot of those activist investors away. And people are really just saying that this is a resilient company and it's doing well because if you look at the stock, I mean, slightly cheaper than that big name Uber. And some people like to arbitrage. So
were you not surprised by this 28% jump in the stock?
I mean, it's really a remarkable number,
yeah.
28%.
The valuation is so low
Yeah.
compared to some of its peers.
Yeah.
Mandeep Singh was saying, look, it's not going to take a lot to move that needle.
Yeah.
Right.
I certainly saw that.
But
Are you an Uber or Lyft person, Alex?
Yes. You got to arbitrage
So you
it.
don't? I don't arbitrage.
You got to arbitrage it.
I will go with the more
Yeah.
affordable option, which is Lyft.
You got to arbitrage.
Definitely cheaper.
I arbitrage, but also as we're looking at another name, I've got eyes on Yelp. Now, this isn't a website that I personally
Is
love
Yelp
to check.
still around, really?
I mean, it's around and it's on my phone. Okay,
Wow.
Romaine, it's on my phone. When I go
Look
out
at
to
that.
eat,
Take that,
I
old
check
man.
it out before I order my food. But this is something I like to really look at. But we're seeing these first quarter results that beat expectations. The company raised the high end of its full year forecast for adjusted EBITDA, and we're really seeing shares getting a pop off of that news. Yelp shares up about 9% at the close here.
Just real quickly, though, too, I do want to go back to that breaking news on the FAA. We actually now starting to see movement in some of the share prices, including United Airlines, which has an outsized presence at Newark Liberty Airport. Those shares now down, Matt, about 3% here in the after-hours trade. We're going to get you some more details on that, but we'll get back to some of the gainers and decliners.
Yeah, I mean, we can get back to the Newark story in a second as well, because Nora and and I were talking about that before we came to you, and I think how bad is it for the U.S. economy if people are afraid to fly? Probably the best thing for officials to do is say, it's not all airlines and it's not the entire U.S. airspace, it's just Newark, in the armpit of America there. So if they blame it on Newark and stop that, maybe people will still fly out of LaGuardia.
And we should point out, the airlines have been actually asking for a bit of a pullback for a while in Newark. So even before these current issues cropped up over the last few weeks. So it'll be interesting too. We should point out, again, just citing our Bloomberg reporters here, 68% of the departures out of Newark actually are on United. So maybe that's why you're seeing such an outsized move in the shares here in the after-hours trade.
Yeah, it's down over 1%, and also during the trading session it was down 4%. It's United Hub, so that's a big deal for that airline, Matt.
Yeah, only nonstop flight from New York to Berlin out of Newark. Let me get to some of these decliners. One of them is airline related, but the first is not Akamai. Was at least one of the biggest losers in the S&P 500 in percentage terms. The company absolutely decimated, losing more than 1/10 of its value after its results kind of underline the problems that they have. JP Morgan says we remain cognizant of the debt level, of the slow top line growth, of the margin pressures. And this is a company that, delivers content to you via the internet, and they're having a problem doing that. Expedia is another one that I want to talk about, and this is obviously the airline related. Although the kids tell me that
it's your demo.
Only old people use Expedia. It's my go-to.
You said that, not
right?
me.
And it makes sense because
Gen
of my
X
age.
tool alert.
They missed results in the first quarter, and then their outlook also disappointed for the second quarter. Weaker than expected domestic travel, weaker than expected inbound travel because fewer people are flying
Why are you still using Expedia, Matt?
I don't know, because I'm 51 years old. In any case,
you're old.
The stock, though the stock has underperformed the S&P year to date and is down today, it's outperformed over the last 5 years. I will say it's up 126%. So it's been a winner over the last 5 years, and hopefully that's the case with me as well. Finally, Compass, it's a digital real estate company. First quarter adjusted EBITDA missed earnings in terms of loss per share and overshadows a boost to its annual forecast. I will say in terms of Compass, I normally anchor Bloomberg Open Interest every weekday from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. on Bloomberg Television.
Look at that.
We have the CEO of Compass, Robert Refkin, with us on my program on Monday morning. So remember that over the weekend.
Amazing.
And come
every
back.
time.
There's
he's
something
in
else
these
going
hours,
on
he
this
does
weekend,
that.
though.
Yes, the trade stuff. Okay, let's go to the bond market. Nothing happened. All right, moving on. Let's go back to the Newark stuff here. And so this is actually a really big deal. I'm already back to the FAA's trade.
Yeah,
they're like,
we're
there's nothing, not
keep
worth talking
going,
about the
Alex.
bond
Keep
market.
going, Alex.
So this is
Yeah.
a really big deal
Yeah.
because also if you divert flights, if you need to like
Yeah.
LaGuardia and Kennedy, what does that wind up looking like?
Well,
for the Northeast?
there's no capacity there.
Totally,
But
particularly
but this gets to the question as to whether now you're going to start to see a more material impact on people avoiding that airport. And I flew out of there just a few weeks ago, maybe like 3 or 4 weeks ago.
How was it?
It was fine. I personally didn't experience any delays, but there's been a lot of talk amongst people basically saying that they have seen a drop off in activity at the airport as I guess people look for alternatives.
Yeah, and I wonder if the flights out of, let's say, JFK or LaGuardia are going to get more expensive as a result, because all of it is dynamic pricing on websites like Expedia or even the airline's own websites.
Or to your point, if you wind up paring back flights in Newark, do the Newark flights wind up getting more expensive?
Yeah, and this gets to this idea, too, of what sort of the government response is going to be. We're talking about really a lot of changes taking place right now with the Federal Aviation Administration and the idea that they have to address some of these, workforce issues, if you will. There was a great report in the New York Times just a few days ago that talked about the number of air traffic controllers that are actually working full-time there relative to the number that would be, and it is a fraction of what it was even just a year ago, and that's a big part of the problem.
Yeah, and they work out of Philadelphia. They don't even work out of the New York area. So that's another thing. And that was all a matter of not just cutting costs, but also accounting for the fact that the cost of living in places like New York City, Long Island is way too expensive for a lot of the folks who work there.
By the way, cutting costs is the problem here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, these people hold our lives in their hands. You got to pay the women and men who are moving tin more, especially in this market. You want the the best and brightest doing that kind of job, right? You don't want the losers who have to live in a town hours away.
High stakes.
I have to say that I called this must-watch TV, and I mean that. I watch this every day, the closed simulcast, so it's an honor to be with you. But I will say to your viewers, switch over to radio. We're going to talk to George Ferguson from Bloomberg Intelligence about this in just a moment. And I hope you join us for that. That does it for our cross-platform coverage of the market close on Bloomberg Television, Radio, and YouTube. And a reminder that Bloomberg Business Week is now on Bloomberg Originals. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time, same place. No, tomorrow.
Monday.
Yeah, Monday.
Okay.
This is Bloomberg Business Week Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
We're back here on Bloomberg Business Week Radio.
Business Week Daily. Business
what am I
Week
saying?
Daily. Is it Business Week Radio, which isn't wrong. In fact, that used to be the case. But
it's
now,
a daily radio.
Across platforms at the entire company, we've added the word daily to every property that ends in week.
How could I forget?
Yeah.
It's daily and then week.
Yeah.
But it's Friday, hey. What can we say? But we've got lots to talk a bit more about as we go through the show. We're going to be hearing from Frank Spicer. He's CEO at Metafied. We're going to be talking a bit about Bitcoin and what's going on there. I mean, as I'm looking at Bitcoin, I'm seeing it up over 100,000, which is really a big number that we did see it hitting earlier before. What is the runway here, Frank? What are people saying about Bitcoin right now?
I mean, right now, Bitcoin's sort of at a crossroads where, the support level is probably around 97,000, but the top is sort of undetermined. And if it breaks through the 105, 107 level, we could see it go all the way up to, 160, 175 pretty easily, because there's a lot of institutions buying, and, states like New Hampshire just recently passed their strategic reserve that will allow for them to hold Bitcoin. And with other states following, I think you'll see competition for the available Bitcoin in the market. So the top could go much higher.
You know what I've noticed, Frank, is ever since Liberation Day, we've seen the dollar really fall out. I was trying to think of an appropriate way to say that the FCC wouldn't. Yes, the dollar has weakened substantially. And at the same time, we've seen a strengthening of Bitcoin. Now, I'm not insane, right? I'm not going to say this digital currency with absolutely nothing backing it besides the faith that a Reddit group has put into it is going to replace the dollar as a world reserve currency. But it kind of looks like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, Matt, I wouldn't say you're insane at all. And I would say what's backing it is the common belief that people can transact in peace without the permission or without needing to sort of rely on the printing press of a fiat currency. I think that's been the original intent of Bitcoin all along. And you're starting to see that coalesce. I think what we saw over the past week, or maybe the past month, the big Bitcoin asset is up 25% for the past 30 days. I think you're starting to see it return to the point where it's unhinged from the equities markets, and it's no longer moving in tandem with sort of the global equities markets. People are starting to see it as a way to diversify risk away from those markets and away from some really uncertain policies, in terms of like money supply, tariffs, and the like.
And you know what's interesting? I actually was at an ATM the other day, and it has the option to use Bitcoin to pull out money as opposed to using my debit card.
But that's crazy. You don't want to spend Bitcoin, do you? You don't want to spend Bitcoin, do you, Frank? I mean,
it was the wildest thing.
I don't know if Nora knows this because younger people don't remember, but there was a dude who bought 2 pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin.
Did he?
10,000. How much money is that worth today, Frank?
A lot.
The last time I checked, it was about $400 million in
My
pizzas.
goodness.
So that's a little expensive for my taste. But I would not use Bitcoin. I would not spend it. It's becoming, it's right now, according to its market cap, the 5th largest asset in the world, just ahead of Amazon.
I mean, how are people thinking about Bitcoin right now? I mean, I think that the market is really in an interesting space where tariffs have been in focus. People are really interested about the geopolitics, trade tensions. How exactly does that affect Bitcoin?
Bitcoin allows governments to sort of move money around in a way that they, as long as they will both accept it on either side. The original intent is you just have two parties in a trade. You don't need a third arbiter. So my sense is, and I don't have the data to prove this, but it feels like with the volumes we're seeing in the market, there's people finding innovative ways around sort of the tariff restrictions and controls just by alternative currencies. That could be the case. But I think the world is at a point where it sees it as a valid asset. It's starting to become more certain that it's going to stay there for the long term. And you're starting to develop around that where that wasn't there in previous cycles. So what was there was just speculative belief that it would one day get to where it is now. But I think we're finally at a mature point in the market development where you're seeing people actually build around it and consider it for ways to execute trades, to leverage, different ways around, what the world's throwing at them right now.
I look at on the Bloomberg terminal, CRYP Go, as I'm sure you know, as everyone knows, pulls up a list of cryptocurrencies. But I don't really care about any of them, Frank, not even Ether. I only care about Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
Why bother with the rest of these? What are there, like 5,000 other cryptocurrencies?
There's quite a few, and I would actually say most of them are junk. And that's coming from somebody who has a company who does crypto-based stuff. It doesn't mean we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. ETH, for instance, is up 11% over the previous day. It's up 40% for the previous 30 days. And what that is an indicator that the DeFi markets, where you're starting to see decentralized finance products pop up, the settlement layer for all of that is ETH. So that's an indicator that the market does want to develop ways to alternatively, move capital around. And you should pay attention to ETH as a barometer for the appetite to develop these types of things.
I just want to say, though, that, Frank, talking at the top about how you don't want to be a slave to the fiat currency, right? Bitcoin is proof of work, right? ETH is proof of stake. It seems like it could be swayed by some big holders.
That's correct. ETH is one of those things where the money supply is not definite. I definitely prefer the economics of Bitcoin for sure, and it's a lot more fair to the users. But ETH is one of those things that it's sort of the base layer of decentralized finance. And for that alone, it's sort of worth seeing what people are willing to build for. I think what we need to do to get some more clarity here is to get some regulatory certainty around stable tokens. And if we can do that, we'll start to see the bridge between the traditional finance system and crypto become a little more certain and clear, and the innovation start to ramp up.
Well, thank you so much. That's a wonderful conversation here with Frank Spicer. I'm keeping an eye on everything that's been going on here.
Let me thank Frank, too.
Please do.
Thank you, dude. I love that guy. Great talking to him. He's got good intel on this crypto world. And by the way, do you know I used to anchor Bloomberg Crypto?
Did you now?
On Bloomberg Television every Tuesday. Yeah, but I don't anymore.
So you've heard enough of it,
Yeah, I had enough. But I started covering Bitcoin like well over 10 years ago. I lived on it for 2 weeks.
Wow.
I wish I'd
What a
kept
time.
it. I wish I'd kept it instead of spent it.
Would have loved to seen that.
This is Bloomberg Business Week Daily.
It's 4:21 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. This Bloomberg Business Flash is brought to you by Oracle. Attention, growing businesses. Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. For new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment, offer ends March 31st. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. Now, this just crossing the Bloomberg terminal. Bain Capital is said to be in talks to buy PCI Pharma at a value of $10 billion. That is a deal that would rank among the year's largest private equity takeovers. We bring you the closing numbers each day here at Bloomberg. S&P down 4 points. NASDAQ gained less than a point. The Dow down 119 points. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.38%. The 2-year yield at 3.88%. Affirm shares plunged as much as 14% after the financial technology company reported what some analysts said were mixed results. Analysts made note of the mostly positive earnings, but they did flag expectations that were very high heading into results. Airlines and U.S. aviation officials reportedly plan to meet on further flight cutbacks at Newark after multiple breakdowns in radar systems. Sources tell Bloomberg the plan currently under consideration would encourage carriers to voluntarily decrease the number of flights for a limited period at Newark. The Department of Transportation is expected to meet with airline leaders for talks in coming weeks. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now back to Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Matt Miller and Nora Melinda.
All right, Amy, thanks very much. Amy Morris there in Washington, D.C. with the general news for you. And I'm going to add to or underline one of the things that she has said. The FAA is weighing a broad pullback in flights out of Newark Liberty International because of a second radar outage in as many weeks. Early this morning, they lost radar visibility again for 90 seconds. And obviously, that doesn't feel safe at all. So the best thing to do before any accidents would be to stop flights going out of there.
Well, you know, a lot's been going on right now, Matt. I've been watching, we're doing the news, but there's so many headlines that have been coming through. And one of the things that I've been keeping an eye on is Trump saying that he is interested, he's open to, right? He said he's okay if they do, hiking taxes on the wealthy. Those are people who are earning $2.5 million or more. And it seems as though he's cautioning the GOP on it, but he says that he's okay with it. It's a lot to uncover here, lots of details.
He has mastered the flip-flop, the wishy-washy statement in a way that nobody else could. Because he said in a Truth Social posting that this is what cost George Bush Sr. the election, although this isn't what cost George Bush Sr. the election. He thinks Congress could do it, although he doesn't think Congress maybe should do it. He's contradicted himself in so many ways, but it's interesting nonetheless.
Yes.
And so we're going to talk about it right now with Eric Wasson, congressional reporter out of Washington, D.C. for us at Bloomberg News. Eric, it seems as if President Trump wants to do this to pay for a lot of the other tax cuts that he's promised while he was on the campaign trail. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, you know, his Truth Social post differs very much from what he's saying in private. He called up Speaker Mike Johnson on Wednesday and asked for this tax rate increase on the wealthy. He also asked in that same conversation to close what's known as the carried interest loophole, to tax carried interest as ordinary income, something that's opposed by private equity, venture capital, and the real estate industry. But, you know, and he's waffling in public. One GOP aide, high level, texted me, you know, this guy's a force of nature. They're really trying to put together this very complicated bill, and his public statements and private interventions are making it even harder to get together on this. The big question is, you know, how many years can they, suspend taxation on tips over time and raise a standard deduction for seniors to compensate for paying tax on Social Security benefits? If they do these other pay-fors, as they're called, like raising tax on the rich, you could maybe do that for 10 years. If not, maybe it's just 2 or 3 or 4 years of that new tax benefit, and then basically they can go to the voters and say, re-elect Republicans in 2028 and we'll extend it.
Mm-hmm. Eric, I mean, of course, when we think about the idea of hiking taxes, especially on the wealthy, this could be said to be counter to what the Republican agenda is in Washington. If there is merit to these tweets and there is a push for this, What exactly does that look like in terms of the hurdles that it takes to make that happen? And does Trump actually have the jurisdiction to make that call?
Well, just to put it simply, I don't see this tax rate increase happening. It's opposed by congressional leadership in both the House and Senate. This is opposed by the core, the traditional Republicans. Now, there are these new America First populists like J.D. Vance, Orrin Cass, others who are in favor of it. And you know what? The politics, they're probably right. Democrats are going to attack this bill as a tax cut for billionaires paid for by cuts to Medicaid and food stamps. And it is a very good chance the Democrats take the House in 2026 elections running against this bill. So I think Trump's political instincts are correct, but the party really doesn't want to be the party of raising taxes. It's one thing that really unites Republicans in the past, and it's going to be almost impossible. They can only lose like 3 votes in the House, the same number in the Senate. And they're just not going to get those votes for this. So I don't think it's really going to happen. The carried interest is a different story. Maybe that gets snuck in. Certainly lobbyists are fighting tooth and nail on that issue as we speak. But I just don't think it's going to happen. Now, Trump has remade the party. If his Truth Social post today came out strongly in favor of this, perhaps he could move mountains. But he's so tepid in his support that I don't see him really being able to get this through.
Now, the interesting thing is that he raised taxes on so many millions of middle-class families in 2017 with the TCJA when he capped the state and local tax deduction, a deduction that had been in place for over a century that really, I think, reflects the heart of American tax policy, that you shouldn't be taxing people twice on the same income. And that cap he promised to lift when he was campaigning here in New York on Long Island before the election. Do you think we're going to see the SALT cap lifted?
It's going to be lifted, but the amount that's on the table now is a $30,000 cap instead of the $10,000 that's there now, not doubled for married couples. That was rejected immediately by a group of Republicans from high tax states like New York and California, including Elise Stefanik, who may be running for governor, who jumped into this fray kind of at the 11th hour. I think maybe they're going to get the marriage penalty eliminated. Maybe it goes up to 40. It can't be much more. It's extremely expensive. We're talking trillions if you get higher into the size of the cap that some people are talking about, $100,000, and they just don't have the running room. In the House, the real issue is that the conservatives want spending cuts, and if you go above $4 trillion, they want more spending cuts that the moderates will not do to Medicaid. The Senate's a different story. In the end of the day, the Senate has given itself a mandate of only cutting $4 billion in spending. They're pretty much primed to put a lot of this on the nation's credit card and then increase the deficit through a budget gimmick that I won't go into now, but basically it assumes that the cost of extending the existing tax cuts is zero. The Senate will probably win the end of the day, but for now, they're just trying to get this out of the House. The House has to start all tax legislation under the Constitution, and they got to satisfy the conservative fiscal hawks a little bit by not just going hog wild on things like unlimited SALT cap.
All right. It feels like they didn't get this tax revenue before. So if you double tax people to get more tax revenue temporarily, and then all of a sudden it turns into, I guess all temporary taxes, Eric, turn into permanent taxes, don't they?
Well, it was a pay-for in 2017. I mean, it was one of the pay-fors. So they're trying to use it again to some degree. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly an argument. Interestingly, business really cares about something known as sea salt, which is the corporate salt deduction. There's been a real effort here to limit that. That's the ability of companies to deduct state income, property, and other fees from their federal taxes. And that was thought of as a pay-for this SALT cap increase. We are hearing that business is probably going to be successful in beating that back. It's a top priority of places like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to not have that in this bill. And we can get into it. There's a host of other similar tax provisions on executive compensation, stock buybacks that lobbyists are fighting over even as we speak.
It's so funny because they don't pay taxes anyway, these corporations, right? If you look at, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but individual taxpayers contribute, I think, $2.2 trillion to annual revenue, and corporations contribute less than $500 billion, something like $450 billion. Is that right?
I don't have those stats right in front of me, so I can't confirm or deny them. But I will say that, you know, corporations will argue that this will impinge on economic growth, their ability to hire and grow their businesses. So, you know, there's probably some merit to that, especially if corporate taxes go much higher. You know, the corporate SALT tax proposal is talking about, that's on the table, is a 1% effective corporate tax increase from the current 21 to 22%.
I mean, of course, when we think about the idea of taxing the rich, this is something that Democrats do want to hear. But I mean, when we think about the Republican Party, is there anybody that would be in support of this? Who else would be potentially on board with Trump?
Oh, well, you know, it's very interesting. Andy Harris is the head of the House Freedom Caucus. He's very much on board. I think I first broke that story when I talked to him in the hallway. He's out on media again today saying, yes, let's do it. He would even go for millionaires, not just 2.5 millionaires, and to pay for some of these other agenda items. So it's interesting. There are interesting allies, even among the most conservative. Josh Hawley, who's a populist in the of the New Style, close to J.D. Vance in the Senate, is also in favor. So there are allies, and these are part of the people who think the Republican Party needs to cement itself as a working class party. Culturally, it's very working class. It embraces very similar values, anti-woke, et cetera. These guys say it needs to be followed up with economic benefits. But on the other hand, you know, certainly economists would say these tariffs, some of which would go into place permanently, that Trump is talking about, are a direct, you know, basically a sales tax that really hits lower and blue collar workers.
Eric, great talking to you. I'll continue to send you the occasional email here and there whenever you're at a SALT story.
To bug him.
He's sick of me. I'm probably shooting him a Bloomberg message. By the way, where are you? It looks like you're set up in a debate hall or something.
I'm so curious.
I'm in the press conference studio of the House of Representatives, right next to the place where I work.
Oh, that makes sense.
Great backdrop.
For our
Okay.
congressional reporter, Eric Wasson. Definitely follow his reporting on the Bloomberg Terminal or Bloomberg.com. I want to get from basically tax policy straight over to the economy. And we have
Tom Orlik.
Tom Orlik here. I was going to say the honor of talking to Tom Orlik because he is our chief economist for Bloomberg Economics, also out of Washington, D.C. Tom, I want to know first, since we just got done talking about tax policy, what do you see happening in terms of the U.S. deficit, right? We're not raising quite as much revenue as maybe we would have expected to, or maybe I'm wrong on that. You can correct me. But we continue to spend so much more than we bring in. And I remember when Elon Musk was talking about cutting $2 trillion from the budget. He clearly hasn't even done half of that or a quarter of that or even an eighth of that. So what does the deficit in the U.S. look like? Does it just continue to grow?
So the Trump administration inherited a fiscal deficit of around 6.5% of GDP, Matt. And the plan to bring it down has multiple components. They would like to have, the Trump administration would like to have stronger economic growth. They would like to have lower interest rates to lower the interest bill. They want to cut taxes to spark economic dynamism, but they want to offset that by spending cuts. That's what Elon Musk is up to. That's also why tariffs are a big part of the Trump agenda. Let's cut taxes at home and let's shift the burden of taxation onto foreign businesses that want to sell into the United States. So lots of moving parts of the agenda, lots of ambition. If you add it up right now, well, not a massive amount of progress. Our forecast for US debt to GDP before January 17th was that it was going to climb from around 100% in 2024 to around 130% in a decade's time. And our latest forecast, even taking account of all of the action, even taking account of all of the high tariffs, is that in 2034, 10 years' time, we're going to be at around 126% of GDP. So a big problem, a lot of ambition from the Trump administration, a lot of moving parts, but so far, we think not really enough to move the dial.
Tom, is it possible to quantify just the two sort of big political numbers here? How much money has Doge cut from spending? How successful has Elon Musk been in cutting $2 trillion or $1 trillion or half a trillion? And then how much money will be raised by President Trump's tariffs?
So I think that both Doge and tariffs are set to underdeliver relative to the expectations set by the administration. So Doge was talking about really big savings, trillions of dollars. In fact, even if we look at their own numbers, we're talking about something between $100 and $200 billion. And a lot of people have got real questions about whether those numbers actually are solid and stack up, or perhaps there's some double counting and other questions about them. On the tariff front, the Trump administration has gone a lot further in raising tariffs than anyone expected. But unfortunately, in terms of revenue raising, there's a kind of Laffer curve dynamic here, right? You remember the famous Laffer curve. If you cut taxes, you encourage activity, so you actually raise more tax revenue. Well, that also works in reverse, right? So if you set a really high tariff rate, well, you're going to significantly reduce imports, and that's going to weigh on how much revenue you're going to raise. So our estimate is with these really high tariffs, the Trump administration could hope to bring in around $350 billion a year in tariff revenue. Certainly not nothing, not peanuts, but also not equal to the challenge of bringing the U.S. deficit under control.
Well, we've all really been following this tit-for-tat tariff war, especially between the U.S. and China. And then there was a news that came out where Trump had tweeted that 80% China tariff, quote unquote, seems right. And of course, there's going to be some talks that are happening in the coming days between the U.S. and China here. But when we think about the economy and how the consumer is grappling with this tumultuous environment, what are you all seeing to be the potential impact of tariffs, not only on corporations, but more specifically the American consumer?
So it's a great question, Nora, and I think it's going to be a question which is front and center for Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer as they trek over to Switzerland for their meeting with China's Vice Premier He Lifeng over the course of the weekend. Right now, U.S. tariffs on China, 145%. That's an incredibly high tariff rate. It basically turns off U.S.-China trade. Now, if you lower tariffs to 80%, well, that's a big drop from 145%. But guess what? 80% tariff is still huge. Would it turn off all U.S.-China trade? Probably not. Would it turn off most of it? Well, our models say probably yes. And then to come back to your question, Nora, for the US consumer, what does that mean? Well, a lot of stuff comes from China, right? Your toys, your textiles, your consumer electronics. So at a minimum, an 80% tariff is going to mean a big price hike. And potentially, if people can't absorb that price hike, it's going to mean some empty shelves.
I love the, you go on TikTok. Probably Donald Trump goes on TikTok.
You use TikTok?
No, I don't. I don't want the Chinese spying on me. I use Instagram like any
others
good
that go on
American
TikTok, okay.
should. But you go on any of these social media sites and they play old clips of Ronald Reagan saying how important free trade and immigration is, or old clips of Milton Friedman saying, I don't know if, Tom, you've seen this one, but he talks about an example of a group of people sitting in a boat, right? And the people represent countries. And if you put up protectionist measures, you're just shooting a hole in the bottom of the boat. And then if you retaliate, you're just shooting more holes in the bottom of the boat. It doesn't really help. I wonder, though, with all of this breathlessness about tariffs, and I'm guilty of, engaging in that, how could we be looking at an economy that's still going to grow this year, or that isn't going to go into a massive recession? You would think when you watch the news that this economy is going to crash, but I hear people forecasting still, even though it's 1%, still growth.
So I think a couple of things here, Matt. So the first thing is, I do think that President Trump and the Trump administration have a point, right? The U.S. has a huge amount of debt. It has a huge trade deficit. Even worse, a lot of that trade deficit is with China, America's biggest political rival, geopolitical rival. And that's not a good position to be in, and it's not a sustainable position to be in. So sort of the fundamental idea that there's a big problem here and there needs to be some serious attempts to fix that problem, I think that makes a bunch of sense. The question is, are these really high tariffs on China the right way of rebalancing that trade relationship? Now, as you note, these really high tariffs are going to come at a cost. They're going to come at a cost to the US consumer. They're going to come at a cost to US businesses. Think about firms like Apple, which have their supply chains in China. Think about US firms like Starbucks and McDonald's that have a big amount of their revenue coming from their Chinese stores. All of these are vulnerable in a trade war. What does that then mean for the US economy? Well, at least in the short term, nothing good, right? So we very significantly revised down our forecast for US GDP growth this year. The Street has significantly revised down their forecast for US GDP growth this year. The Trump administration say, there's a big problem, we need an extreme solution, trust us, we're going to get to a good place where manufacturing and jobs have come back to the United States. We'll see if we can get there. In the meantime, the transition costs, they look pretty significant.
Hey, Tom, I'm seeing some red heads across the Bloomberg terminal right now. It says the debt limit measures could run out by August. This is Bessent speaking here. And Bessent is urging Congress to raise the debt limit by mid-July. What's your initial reaction to these headlines, and what do you think this could potentially mean for the economy as we're thinking about the outlook here?
Apparently, Scott Bessent has written a letter to Congress, and Bloomberg News has gotten hold of that letter.
Oh, wow. Even better.
Okay, well, so I think there's a certain kind of never quality to the US debt problem, right? US debt is big, it's growing quickly, but the US is the issue of the world's reserve currency. It is a magnet for capital from around the world. Demand for treasury bonds remains robust. So in theory, America could just carry on growing its debt, but demand for that debt would still be there, right? Now, the debt ceiling is a kind of self-imposed mechanism that puts a constraint on that, right? Because unless Congress agrees that the debt ceiling can be raised, well, the Treasury's ability to finance that debt, it hits a hard limit, right? So in past years, there's been this kind of dance around the debt limit, questions around whether it could be breached for a moment or more than a moment without triggering some kind of catastrophic moment in the Treasury market. And we've always skirted that catastrophe, right? In fact, the debt limit debate has been like played out in red headlines, but you haven't really seen that much red ink in the markets, right? Investors have kind of faded it out. We'll see if that changes this year with all of the things the Trump administration is trying to do in terms of tax cuts, in terms of efficiency savings, in terms of increasing tariff revenue.
Well, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation, Tom. We really enjoyed our time with you. I wanted to take some time to talk a little bit about aerospace and defense.
Yeah, no, we'll get there. And I know you cover that, but I was going to say thank you to Tom as well. And also, Tom, do you have a podcast? Because I could listen to you for
all day,
hours.
Right?
Is there something where we can get more Tom Orlick?
You know, it's the British accent, Matt, and I discovered to my horror that it, whilst it still works quite well in America, it doesn't work in England. I was speaking to an audience in England the other day, and I completely missed the looks of rapt admiration that I've become used to in the when I speak on American media.
Stay here.
I don't have a podcast, but if I did have a podcast, I would only market it to my American friends. That appears to be where the market is.
Well, we love having you, Tom. Thanks so much. Tom Warlick there is the chief economist for Bloomberg Economics. Now, you're normally on the other side of the building.
Yes,
you're writing for
estate.
Bloomberg News. You cover the stocks. You cover, I know, housing, real estate, because you're talking about the REITs that are exposed maybe to Hollywood. And oddly, because I wouldn't put this pairing together, you've been covering defense and aerospace.
Yeah, so George Ferguson, our next guest, has definitely been my guy. I love to read his research. He is, of course, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Aerospace Defense and Airlines Analyst, and he's joining us here today just to chat about what's going on right now in the aerospace and defense industry. I mean, of course, we've really been talking about the defense budget and how all those things are really impacting U.S. defense primes here. George,
we booked him to talk about the Boeing sales
Fair.
to IAG,
Fair.
but now
We're getting there.
Yeah, now we got the headlines on Newark.
No, very true. So many things going on right now. But I mean, of course, as Matt just pointed out, we have the IAG is ordering 71 large jets from Boeing and Airbus to grow its network. George, what is the initial reaction to this, and how are you all thinking about this in terms of peers and what it really just generally means for Boeing?
First, thanks for having me on. We really thought that Boeing would probably be in the middle of the Trump administration's balance of payments equalization process, let's call it, right? And I think the defense primes will be there as well. And so it wasn't surprising to us when we saw the first deal made with the UK include Boeing jets, right? And so I think they talked about $10 billion worth of Boeing jets. We saw a bunch of 787 orders today. I might quibble about whether it's really $10 billion worth. I think they're using list prices, so maybe we could have goosed that up a little bit if we used actual pay prices. But I'd expect this is going to be a trend you're going to see around the world as the Trump administration engages countries with, again, balance of payment with the U.S. that's out of whack, and they're gonna probably offer them components for aircraft from Boeing and defense products in order to balance it. So I think you could see a pretty good year for the Boeing order book, and it's been a little bit light recently because they haven't been executing. Airbus has been, and Airbus has been taking the majority of orders last couple of years. So it would be a nice tailwind for Boeing to have a good year of orders underneath them.
Well, I'm glad of that. I love the wide body planes. I hate the 737s and the A320s.
So wide body, more space?
I need more space.
Okay.
You know, and
As you
I guess
should.
IAG is going to use these for BA. I use Iberia a lot, which IAG also owns. So I'm looking forward just to having more. You know, look at me. I'm a big guy.
You're a big guy, right? Need the
I
leg
need
room.
it. But I am not going to be flying out of Newark. Typically, when I go to Berlin, I'm on a United flight straight out of Newark. But over the last 2 weeks, George, we've had 2 events where the radar screens go blank. And to me, although I heard from, I think the CEO of United said it's still safe. That does not sound safe to me. How safe is it when the radar screen turns off, George?
I think you're right. I would argue that it probably isn't that safe, but I would expect the FAA and the CEO of United to say it is safe because that's what they always say. But I'd find it very concerning.
So, I mean, what happens then? I mean, first of all, what happens? Does the FAA have to stop people flying out of Newark? Because if we think that all airline travel is dangerous, that is horrendous for the U.S. economy. So isn't it the right move for officials to say, no, it's just this one airport and stop people from flying in and out of that one?
I mean, I think one, there's just no way we're going to be able to stop people coming in and out of Newark, and just to make sure we understand what the outage is. The outage is for aircraft sort of arriving into the Newark area, not so much the air traffic control going directly landing at Newark. And so, is that a little bit better? I think it is. I think you have more time to react. Clearly, the FAA has to get better systems in place. Part of the backstory here is they moved the control of this approach and departure from Newark from a control center in New York out in Long Island to Philadelphia because New York is pretty overworked. They've got LaGuardia, they've got Kennedy. They tried to put in systems that would essentially remote into the New York Center to get the controllers all the information they needed. And they thought they had redundant systems in place, and clearly they didn't. So they have to redouble their efforts in making sure they've absolutely got a fail-safe line that gets them the data they need from that New York center. And then I think, part of that is that some of the employees were, very stressed out about the experience. and they've gone on leave, and that's put them at a shortage. So I think it's temporary at Newark. Newark is a challenging airport, as you know. In the summer, when we start to get thunderstorms, we can always have backups at Newark, even under normal circumstances. But if the FAA wants to push through and control this out of Philadelphia, which seems to be the right move given the amount of workload in New York, they're going to have to redouble their efforts on this backup system to make sure that there's always information, and they're going to have to get the controllers working there in Philadelphia again.
Hey, George, there was a time where people were really concerned about hopping on a Boeing plane. I would argue that people are still a little bit uncomfortable with getting on some Boeing planes. But as we've kind of navigated through earnings season, has the focus really been about tariffs and Boeing and other A&D companies' exposure to tariffs? Or are people at all still talking a little bit about the safety aspect for passengers on flights?
Here and there, I do still hear people tell me they won't fly a Boeing airplane, they're concerned about it. I personally am not. I'd fly anytime. So, but I do think that that the narrative is starting to turn to effective tariffs, as well as Boeing's manufacturing process. Is it stable? Is quality coming through it? Which I guess sort of bleeds into that question: Would you fly a Boeing airplane? And what we've seen in 1Q, we saw good deliveries. We saw them get rid of some of the inventory of airplanes. They've already been built. They've been sitting on tarmacs. Costs a lot of money to keep those maintained. They're getting rid of them. That'll help the cost at Boeing, and it helps them focus on the manufacturing line, which is where the cash generation is going to come from. That's going to lead the turnaround. And I would say 1Q looked pretty good. And so I think the narrative, we've got to watch tariffs closely. I don't think tariffs will hurt Boeing that much. Again, I think they'll be involved in negotiations over balance of payments. I think there's other parts of the backlog where they could deliver airplanes away from tariff issues. And so it looks to us like the setup could still be pretty good for a recovery for Boeing for a lot of deliveries this year and some good cash generation.
George, in general, I think people, though, are worried about safety, not necessarily about the 737. I know you'll still fly it. Paul Sweeney loves that plane.
He does.
But we've had more air crashes. We have these problems now at Newark. Is it just bad timing that this happens at the same time that Elon Musk is taking a chainsaw to government jobs, or is this because of that kind of cost cutting? And I also wonder, air traffic control, are they paid enough to work in the New York metro area, or do we need to pay them more?
So I think a bunch of questions in there. Maybe
two separate questions, right? Is it Doge or not? And should we pay these guys moving tin a little bit more?
So I think that first, it's not Doge in my view, right? So air traffic control system is something that is built over decades. And that's part of the challenge of managing it and upgrading it, is that you've got old systems working with new. The air traffic control system never seems to get enough money from Congress to make it as whiz-bang as we should have here in the United States. It's important to us. It's important to our economy. We have a very disparate country, right? We've got population centers pretty far apart, no trains that link them. So to me, it's super critical to the U.S. infrastructure. It never seems to get the money it deserves. And so this is a buildup over decades of putting this together with baling wire and tape, right? So hopefully the Trump administration does come through with a nice upgrade program for the system, because I think it would also fix some of the controller issue. I think you could bring a lot better technology to the business and not have to worry about recruiting controllers. I think we're having a challenge recruiting controllers. Are they paid enough? Probably not, right? I hear ranges from $70,000 to $220,000. You probably know, even with $220,000 a year, it's probably a little bit hard to live on Long Island. So if you're starting out at 70, I don't know how you live in Long Island. I will tell you, some of them get overtime and other things that bolster their pay. And so maybe they don't want 100% backfill of all the employees, but probably just a bad situation for us to be in. And so we need to do better recruiting, and we probably need to raise some pay in that area.
Mm-hmm.
All right, George. Thanks very much, George Ferguson there, Nora Melinda's chief source on
always
aerospace and defense. By the way, I should have said Pushington. Pushington is the name of the 1999 John Cusack film about air traffic controllers, also starring Billy Bob Thornton, also starring Kate Blanchett, also starring Angelina Jolie.
Is this your demo thing again, or?
Yeah, exactly.
So I need to go home and catch up.
I'm just giving you a heads up there.
Well, thank you so much to George Ferguson for joining us here on this Friday. We're going to move over to stock movers. Let's take a look at some stocks on the move today. I'm Nora Melinda with Matt Miller. Of course, we're in for Carol Massar and Tim Stinovic. We're alongside Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Emily Grafeo. What are you keeping an eye on today?
Okay, so one of the best performers in the S&P 500 for the week was Insulet. It was actually the number one, up 20% on the week, with most of that move coming here today on Friday. This is an insulin pump maker that boosted their revenue guidance for the full year, and they posted better than expected first quarter results. It was the biggest gain on Friday since November 2022. Piper Sandler said that they view the guidance increase positively and as more evidence of strong momentum in the business. And this was a day when a lot of other healthcare stocks were moving lower, a week where healthcare was kind of weaker, but here we have Insulet, the best performer of the week.
All right, Disney had an absolutely killer day. It was, I think, Wednesday when they were at more than 10%. What's the story with Disney?
So they're also one of the best performers in the S&P 500 on the week. They're up 14% to finish out this week. They beat expectations in the second quarter. They raised their outlook for the full year. A lot of companies right now are either pulling back their guidance, moving it lower, and yet they came out and they benefited from this faster than expected growth at their parks and their streaming business. And so their forecast was actually for the full year EPS double their previous forecast. So anyone who says that tourism is falling off, just look at Disney. Apparently people are still going to the parks. They're still paying for those wildly expensive tickets. And of course, using Disney Plus, the streaming service.
So also, you're keeping an eye on Palantir. What are you seeing?
So this was a stock that was really on the move this week. It finished the week down 5.6% after it had one of its worst drops, the most in a year, back on Tuesday after their earnings, which were actually pretty good. They did beat, but the stock is up 450% over the last 12 months. So a lot of analysts were saying, you know what, the bar is just too high. Even though the earnings were pretty good, we just can't justify owning this stock anymore given how much it's already run up, the valuation, again, just like the momentum in the stock. But keeping an eye on this one because it did have a couple days up, a couple days down this week, but overall it did finish the week lower.
For more conversations like this, listen to our new Stock Movers podcast. Subscribe for 5-minute episodes on the biggest winners and losers in the stock market. Listen to Stock Movers on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere you get your podcast. Thank you, Emily Grafeo. That does it for Bloomberg Business Week Daily. Bloomberg Balance of Power starts right now.
That's right. And by the way, if you don't want to hear about politics, if you've just had enough, it's Friday going into the weekend, check out my podcast. It's called Hot Pursuit with Hannah Elliott. You can get it on Apple Podcasts, on Bloomberg.com, or wherever you get your